By the time Thursday arrives, we find ourselves at a peculiar crossroads, not quite at the end of the week, yet far removed from the fresh resolve of Monday. It is in this transitional space that a subtle, often unrecognized danger begins to emerge: fatigue. Not just physical exhaustion, but a deeper, more corrosive kind of tiredness, a mental depletion, a spiritual weariness. On the surface, everything might seem manageable. People are still showing up to work, attending meetings, responding to messages. But if you observe more closely, what you begin to notice is that presence has started to drift. There's a dullness behind the eyes, a slowness in reaction, a slight hesitancy in decision-making. This is not accidental, it's Thursday. Throughout the week, each day extracts a cost from us, emotionally, cognitively, and energetically. And unlike the weekend, which invites restoration, or even Wednesday, which offers a kind of motivational checkpoint, Thursday provides no such reprieve. It demands continuation without replenishment. In many ways, Thursday is the cliff edge of endurance. It is the point where the weight of the week begins to overtake the momentum of our initial intentions. From a psychological standpoint, this is a fascinating juncture. Cognitive psychologists have long observed that decision fatigue, the gradual erosion of willpower and discernment, accumulates over time. Each choice we make throughout the day draws from a finite reservoir of mental energy. Now multiply that over the course of several days. By Thursday, that reservoir is dangerously low, and yet paradoxically, this is often when we are expected to operate at peak productivity. Deadlines loom, schedules compress, and expectations intensify. This is where danger enters, not in the form of catastrophe, but in subtle miscalculations. A missed detail, a poorly chosen word, a shortcut taken in haste. These are not just minor slip-ups, they are signals, indicators that our internal balance is shifting. We are no longer acting from clarity, but from depletion. And when depletion becomes our mode of being, the door opens to a host of vulnerabilities. Stress responses become reactive rather than intentional. Our patience contracts, and our creativity shrinks. The philosopher S. Ren Kierkegaard once wrote that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. And on Thursdays, we feel this dizziness acutely, because we are not only tired, we are confronted by the tension of having to continue acting freely and decisively while no longer feeling fully sovereign over our choices. In simpler terms, we are asked to give more while having less to give. And we comply, often without questioning the cost. But there's a deeper layer to consider. On Thursday, many of us begin to experience a kind of existential fog. It's not depression, and it's not burnout in the clinical sense. It's more subtle, more pervasive, a quiet disconnection from purpose. We're doing the tasks, attending the meetings, checking the boxes, but the why behind these actions starts to blur. Without time to reflect or realign, we operate on autopilot, which is perhaps one of the most dangerous psychological states. Not because it is outwardly chaotic, but because it is inwardly hollow, and yet because everything on the surface still functions. We rarely pause to diagnose the condition. We dismiss it as just being tired, unaware that what we are really experiencing is a misalignment between effort and meaning. That gap, if left unchecked, becomes a source of inner conflict, one that saps joy, reduces resilience, and distorts perception. So why is Thursday so dangerous? Because it wears the mask of normalcy. It doesn't shock us into awareness the way a crisis might. Instead, it erodes us slowly, and it is in this erosion that we lose our sharpness, our groundedness, our sense of self-direction. The body continues, but the mind lags behind. And the more we normalize this state, the more disconnected we become from our inner compass. What can be done? The answer is not simply to rest more, though that is part of it. The deeper invitation is to become aware of our internal rhythms, to observe when we are no longer fully present, and to honor that awareness without judgment. When we notice the early signs of fatigue, that is not a failure, it is an opportunity. An invitation to pause, to breathe, to return to intention. Because ultimately, Thursday is not dangerous in itself. What makes it dangerous is our failure to recognize what it reveals. It is a mirror, held up to show us how we live, and perhaps how we should live differently. Pause long enough to notice what you're becoming before the week finishes deciding for you. There's a curious thing that happens on Thursdays. Somewhere between the waning energy of Wednesday and the anticipatory relief of Friday, a shift takes place. Not necessarily in our environment, but in our minds. It's the rise of something subtle but potent overconfidence. And this is where the danger quietly enters again. By Thursday, we've survived the majority of the work week. We've attended the meetings, submitted the reports, responded to the demands. We've kept ourselves afloat in the current of responsibilities. And because of that, we start to believe, often unconsciously, that the hardest part is behind us. We feel we've earned some relief, some reward, some margin for error. But this psychological turning point is precisely where we become vulnerable. When we believe we are almost done, we start loosening the grip on our own standards. We begin to underestimate what's still ahead. It's not arrogance in the loud sense. It's not bragging or boasting. It's the quiet overconfidence that whispers, "You've got this. You can ease up now." And that whisper is seductive. It's also deceptive. The problem isn't that we feel capable. Capability, when rooted in awareness, is essential. The problem is when confidence drifts into complacency. When our sense of completion outpaces the actual demands still in front of us, we lose touch with the moment we're in. This is a form of mental time travel. We begin to act as if we're already at the finish line, when in truth, we're still in the race. From a psychological perspective, this shift has real consequences. Studies on performance and decision-making show that confidence, when not matched by focus, often leads to increased errors. We skim instead of reading deeply. We assume rather than verify. We rush what still requires precision. This is especially true on Thursdays, when that false sense of finality clouds our ability to fully engage with the tasks at hand. Philosophically, we could think of this as a break in discipline. The Stoics warned constantly of this temptation, the human tendency to slacken our efforts when we feel success is near. Epictetus reminded his students that it's not the beginning or even the middle of an endeavor that reveals our character, but the end. The final stretch, when we're tempted to relax, is when discipline must become most alive. This is what makes Thursday dangerous. Not because it's inherently more difficult than other days, but because it tempts us to treat it as if it isn't. It invites a subtle disengagement, a premature victory lap. We trick ourselves into thinking the week is already won, and in doing so, we let go of the very attentiveness that carried us this far. You might notice this in small things. A rushed email that contains a mistake, a skipped detail in a project that leads to confusion, a meeting where you're physically present but mentally elsewhere. These aren't massive errors, but they are markers of something deeper, a mind stepping out of alignment with its actions, a person starting to believe the external structure of the week matters more than their internal presence within it. We must understand something here. Presence is not a finite resource that runs out by Thursday. It's a practice, a cultivated state of being that must be renewed every day, regardless of how close we think we are to some external goal or endpoint. When we allow overconfidence to take the wheel, we're not only betraying our responsibilities, we're stepping out of the moment where life is actually happening. And the moment is all we truly have. The past is already written. The future is only imagined. The only place we can move with clarity, integrity, and awareness is right now. Thursday challenges us to return to that truth, not by demanding more effort, but by demanding deeper presence. Not by rushing to finish, but by remembering why we began in the first place. So the question is not, are you almost done? The real question is, are you still here? Are you still fully inhabiting your actions, your words, your responsibilities? Let Thursday be the day you refuse to coast on yesterday's momentum. Let it be the day you return to the moment, not because you have to, but because you can. Because presence is not something the week gives you. It is something you choose. By Thursday, something begins to build that isn't always visible on the surface, but is deeply felt beneath it. It's pressure. Not the kind of sudden, explosive pressure that comes with crisis, but the slow, tightening coil of accumulated expectations. And if we look carefully, we can see how this pressure reveals another layer of Thursday's danger. One that has more to do with our internal relationship to time, control, and the illusion of productivity. Throughout the week, we move with a certain rhythm. Monday brings initiation, often tinged with resistance. Tuesday brings momentum. Wednesday feels like a midpoint, a chance to assess and course correct. But Thursday carries a different weight. It's where everything that wasn't completed, solved, resolved, or communicated earlier in the week suddenly comes due. The margin for delay closes. Time tightens. And it becomes very clear if it doesn't happen now, it probably won't happen this week. This is where the pressure spikes. Not necessarily because we have more to do, but because we now feel that we have less time in which to do it. And psychologically, this creates tension. That tension manifests in our breath, in our pace, in the way our minds jump from task to task without truly settling. We become hurried, not efficient. We become reactive, not responsive. And in this rushed state, the quality of our presence begins to erode. Many of us are conditioned to interpret pressure as a sign that we must push harder, speed up, multitask, stretch ourselves even thinner. But this conditioning is dangerous because it links urgency with value. It teaches us to believe that the faster we go, the more we're worth. But that's an illusion. True value, true mastery, does not emerge from speed. It emerges from depth, from attention, from moving in alignment with reality rather than racing ahead of it. What makes Thursday especially dangerous is that the pressure often goes unacknowledged. It becomes the invisible background hum to our day. We normalize it. We internalize it. We start believing that feeling tense and under strain is simply part of what it means to be responsible. But pressure without awareness is not responsibility, it's compulsion. And compulsion clouds clarity. When we are under pressure and unaware of it, we begin to make decisions not from intention, but from survival. We say yes to things we shouldn't. We agree to timelines that are unrealistic. We force conversations that aren't ready. We act not because the action is right, but because we feel we must act. And when we move from this place, the consequences ripple outward. To our teams, our relationships, and ultimately to ourselves. There is also a philosophical dimension here. Pressure, when left unchecked, narrows our field of perception. It reduces life into a binary success or failure, done or not done, on time or late. But this is a deeply impoverished view of existence. Life is not a checklist. It's a process. It breathes. It unfolds. And if we approach it only with the anxious energy of completion, we miss the subtle wisdom it offers. We miss the chance to deepen our understanding of ourselves and others. We miss the chance to grow rather than just produce. Now, I'm not suggesting that deadlines don't matter. They do. Structure matters. Follow through matters. But what matters more is how we hold these responsibilities. Are we grounded in them or crushed by them? Are we present to the process or fixated on the outcome? Pressure, when held consciously, can sharpen us, but when absorbed unconsciously, it distorts us. Thursday is dangerous not because it is difficult, but because it distorts our sense of proportion. It tricks us into thinking that everything must be done now, that our entire worth is measured in these final hours before the week closes. But this mindset is unsustainable. It depletes us, and worse, it disconnects us from the larger arc of our lives. The practice, then is not to escape pressure, but to meet it with awareness. To pause and ask what is truly essential here. Not everything is urgent. Not everything requires our full energy right now. The ability to discern, to choose where to place our attention, even in moments of stress, is a form of mastery that few cultivate, but all need. So when Thursday arrives and the pressure builds, let that be your signal. Not to move faster, but to slow down inside. To come back to the breath, to move with intention rather than compulsion. Because how we carry pressure is ultimately how we carry ourselves. Don't let the noise of urgency drown out the quiet voice of wisdom. There's a moment in the week where cracks begin to appear. Small, often imperceptible at first. A forgotten password, a missed message, a dropped glass. Nothing catastrophic, but still something off. And when you look closer, these micro errors tend to cluster around a particular point. Thursday, it's as if the system, your system, is fraying at the edges, not from a single overwhelming blow, but from accumulated strain, sustained effort, and diminished attention. And here lies another danger, the rise in mistakes and accidents, not because the day is inherently cursed, but because by Thursday, we are no longer fully present in the moment we're living. We don't often associate danger with ordinary tasks. Sending an email, taking a phone call, crossing a street, these are not dramatic things, but their very ordinariness is what makes them dangerous when done without awareness. When your body is in the room, but your mind is already planning tomorrow or trying to recover from yesterday, what happens to the task at hand? It becomes shallow, rushed, fragmented. And this fragmentation is not just mental, it becomes physical. The hand trembles slightly when pouring coffee. The sentence in the report comes out confused. The simple choice leads to an unintended consequence. This is the mind on Thursday. A mind that is tired but still pushing. A mind that believes it can function at full capacity without being fully engaged. And this is precisely when accidents happen. Not just physical ones, but moral and emotional ones too. A careless word. An assumption made without inquiry. A promise broken because we forgot we made it. These are the quieter forms of damage. The ones we only notice later, when the ripple effect finally reaches us. Psychologically, we can trace this to the concept of cognitive load. Our brains can only hold so much information, so many unresolved tasks, before performance begins to degrade. Not linearly, but exponentially, meaning the more you try to juggle at once, especially under fatigue, the more likely you are to drop everything. And yet, on Thursday, most of us are still operating as if we're at peak capacity. We rarely pause to ask whether our internal state matches the complexity of the actions we're attempting. We just keep going, keep reacting, keep hoping that effort will make up for clarity. But effort alone is not enough. In fact, when misplaced, effort can make things worse. Imagine a blunt knife being forced through delicate material. It doesn't cut, it tears. This is what happens when we act without presence. Our decisions don't land cleanly. They leave messes behind. And most of the time, we don't even realize this until we're dealing with the consequences. Philosophically, this points to a deeper truth. Clarity is not something you earn by pushing harder. It's something you arrive at by becoming still enough to see. And Thursday, for many, is the day we forget to be still. We are too consumed with completion, too preoccupied with control. The irony is that the more we try to force perfection in this state, the more imperfect everything becomes. Because quality is not a function of force. It's a function of attention. In martial arts, they say the best movement is the one that arises effortlessly from stillness. Not because it's weak, but because it's rooted. Thursday asks us to examine whether our actions are rooted, or if they're simply reflexes. Are we responding to the moment from depth, or reacting to pressure from the surface? This distinction matters. It determines whether our choices are clean or cluttered, effective or chaotic. So when mistakes begin to increase on Thursday, Don't rush to correct the mistake itself. Instead, trace it back to the mind that made it. Ask, was I fully here? Was I breathing, grounded, engaged? Or was I elsewhere, lost in the illusion of urgency, dissociated from the simplicity of the now? Because sometimes, what we call a mistake is not the failure of action, but the absence of awareness. And this is where the deeper teaching of Thursday begins to unfold, not as a warning, but as an invitation to slow down, not in speed, but in consciousness, to re-enter your body, your breath, your senses, to come back to the moment where skill and attention meet, because this moment, this small, living moment, is where your life actually happens. Be where your hands are. Let your mind catch up to your body. The day may demand speed, but mastery demands presence. By the time Thursday unfolds, most people are not just physically tired, they're emotionally threadbare. The face still smiles. The emails are still written with polite punctuation. The tasks are still checked off. But underneath, something has shifted. The patience that was generous on Monday has become measured. The kindness that came naturally on Tuesday now requires effort. And by Thursday, emotional burnout begins to quietly make itself known. Not in explosions, but in subtle withdrawals. You might notice it in the way someone responds with a delay that wasn't there before, or how a simple request is met with irritation instead of understanding. Even in your own thoughts, there's a kind of edge, a thinning of empathy, a narrowing of tolerance. These aren't failures of character, they're signals. Indicators that our emotional reserves, like our physical ones, are not infinite, and Thursday is often when we begin to run out. What's important to understand is that emotional burnout doesn't arrive with a siren. It's not loud or dramatic. It creeps in quietly. It builds from small, repeated moments of disconnection. A conversation where you don't feel heard, a task you complete without meaning, a day that feels like repetition without purpose, and then another, and another, until suddenly the inner light begins to dim. This kind of burnout is more dangerous than we often realize. Not because it makes us collapse, but because it makes us disengage. We become hollow in our roles, still performing, still responding, but no longer truly with anything. Not with our colleagues, not with our families, not even with ourselves. We begin to inhabit our lives like actors, stuck in a role they've played too long, with no audience left watching. Psychologically, this is tied to the depletion of emotional regulation. Throughout the week, we are constantly managing not just what we do, but how we do it. We hold back annoyance, we show encouragement, we listen deeply, we put on a brave face. All of these are emotional expenditures. And if we don't find time to restore, to recharge, to reconnect with something beyond performance, we reach a point, often Thursday, where the emotional cost exceeds the available capacity. And then we begin to withdraw. This withdrawal may not look dramatic, but it's powerful. It's the moment when compassion is replaced by calculation, when connection is replaced by convenience, when presence is replaced by pretense. And while it's easy to overlook because the surface still appears functional, the human spirit is no longer nourished by the interaction. Something essential has been lost. Philosophically, this raises a vital question. What sustains us emotionally in a world that is constantly demanding? It's not just rest. It's not just time off. What sustains us is meaning. When we can connect our actions to something larger than ourselves, when we can see a thread of purpose woven through the week, even on its most exhausting days, that connection becomes fuel. But when our actions become disconnected from meaning, when we're doing everything just to get it done, we become empty, regardless of how productive we appear. Thursday asks us to look at this directly. To ask, am I still living from the inside out, or have I begun to live from the outside in? That is, am I still acting from intention, from depth, from inner alignment? Or am I simply responding to whatever is being thrown at me, trying to keep up? The difference matters. Because one way leads to fulfillment, even in difficulty. The other leads to a slow erosion of joy, a soft decline into numbness, and that numbness, when left unchecked, hardens into cynicism, frustration, and eventually disconnection, not just from others, but from ourselves. So what do? We begin by noticing when irritation arises faster than usual, when we feel disconnected, not because others are distant, but because we've drifted inwardly. We pay attention to the quality of our emotions, not just their intensity, but their origin. And then we pause, not forever, not dramatically, just long enough to remember who we are beneath the pressure. Just long enough to breathe and reconnect with why we're doing what we're doing. Even a moment of real stillness in the midst of a chaotic Thursday can begin to restore that thread of inner meaning. Because emotional burnout isn't just a sign that you've done too much. It's often a sign that you've gone too long without coming back to yourself. And if you're not home within your own presence, then no amount of progress will feel like peace. There's a particular illusion that takes shape on Thursday, and it's this: that once we make it through, we'll be free. That Friday will be lighter, easier, even redemptive. We tell ourselves, just one more day, and in that, Thursday becomes not just a day of pressure, fatigue, or error. It becomes the staging ground for how we approach the end of the week. But here's the quiet truth: the mindset we carry on Thursday often determines the quality of our Friday. And that, in turn, defines how we enter our weekend, our rest, our so-called recovery. If we're not careful, Thursday doesn't just end Thursday. It sets the tone for how we finish everything. Most people don't fall apart on Friday because they're weak. They fall apart because Thursday has already drained them. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually. The problem isn't that they're tired. It's that they've been pushing through Thursday with a survival mindset, not a conscious one. They've been reacting rather than responding, rushing rather than refining. And when Friday arrives, there's nothing left. No reflection, no integration. Just a kind of collapse into the end of the week, hoping that the weekend will magically reset everything. But we know it doesn't. Not really. When Thursday is used as a means of escape, when it becomes the desperate sprint to the freedom of Friday, it creates a mental state of imbalance. This is the root of a very common phenomenon: reckless Fridays. Not reckless in the obvious sense of wild behavior, but in the quieter sense of neglect, neglecting our standards, neglecting our boundaries, neglecting our inner compass. It shows up in conversations that feel forced or superficial, in decisions made quickly just to get things off the desk, in the way people show up late, distracted, or checked out. It shows up in our bodies too. The stiffness, the heaviness, the subtle ache that tells us you've gone too far without coming back to center. So the real danger is not Thursday alone. It's the way Thursday silently scripts Friday. And more broadly, it's how this pattern, rushing toward the end of things, shapes the way we live. Because this pattern doesn't just play out weekly. It becomes a way of being. We rush toward deadlines, holidays, retirement, even rest, believing that peace lies somewhere just ahead. But the way we approach the end matters as much as the end itself. If we arrive at Friday drained, disconnected, and reactive, then our rest is not real rest. It's just recovery from damage.